Hello, everybody. My name is Cepeda, and I am the Director of ABA Skills in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and the co-director of One-to-One Learning Works in Pine Brook, New Jersey. So I've been working with kids on the autism spectrum for a little over 25 years now, and my focus and area, like let's just say, is my specialty is language development. So the way that I was trained was really with putting such a focus, like almost 90% or more of each child's program was all language training, all language development. And then there was one math goal, one reading goal, one writing goal as the kids got older, but otherwise it was all based on communication. And I feel strongly that even today, our kids need to have that level of intensity of language training in order to become effective communicators. So I started as a teaching assistant at a little school in Cedar Knolls, New Jersey, and then eventually started working with the Lovaas Institute, or working for the Lovaas Institute, where I received the bulk of my training on just about everything you're going to see tonight. Then I went on to work in some applied behavior analysis schools, and now just working with ABA skills and one-to-one learning works. But it's been a very long career. I've worked with kids as young as 18 months and as old as 28. And always the primary issues were language. Yes, a lot of the kids had challenging behavior, but that was something that, while we had behavior plans, I, again, always felt strongly that a critical element to the behavior plans is communication. So it's not only functional communication training to replace the challenging behavior that's occurring, but it's actually having a program that develops concepts that lead toward conversational language. So what we're going to talk about tonight are some critical programs that, when mastered and generalized, doesn't guarantee that your learner is going to have a conversation, because there's a whole conversation sequence of programming that we're not going to talk about tonight, but all of these things have to fit into that. And we'll go through everything very, very slowly and systematically. So what do I mean when I say language training? So our kids communicate vocally, they communicate with sign, or they might communicate using an AAC device. I don't care what they communicate with, as long as they are fluent and effective communicators. So if you're working with a learner that has an AAC device, really what you want to be doing is all of the responding should be on the device, okay? Not just using the device for requesting or for something else. Exactly the same way vocal kids respond during instruction is exactly how kids that use devices and sign should respond during instruction. So you show a learner a pen and you say, "What's this?" And the learner should go to his device and say, "It's a pen," or "pen." And then you say, "What color?" And he finds gray. And you say, "Tell me about this." And he says, "It's a gray pen." And if the challenge is latency or slow responding, then there are other ways to address that and to get kids responding much faster and without latency. So anyway, this is what I mean when I say language training. We're talking about vocal language, we're talking about AAC devices, and we're talking about sign language. So as we talk about the programming tonight, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we are not only talking about kids that have vocal language. Okay, so where did the programming in this presentation come from? So the programming, the programming was either taken directly from the Lovaas Institute curriculum, or it was modified somehow, because I'm sure that some of my colleagues at the Lovaas Institute are going to take a look and be like, "Oh, that's very familiar, but that doesn't look familiar." So some of the stuff is just things that I've done with kids that I found to be effective to get them through some of this programming faster, because there is just a lot that we have to teach, right? It's not just functions and labels, and we have to teach them prepositions and pronouns and the things we're going to talk about tonight, same and different, and why, and who, and what, and where, and when, and how. And they have to be able to use all of this stuff. They have to be able to respond and they have to be able to initiate. So what you're going to see tonight in some of the programming is that I use the words receptive and expressive. And I think that that's fine. If you are using Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior, awesome. I think that I could use the language of receptive and expressive as long as we all understand the sources of control. Then we can just go ahead and continue to use receptive and expressive. But if you're using Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior, then I will refer to it periodically and say, hey, we're doing this. This is a tag. This is an introverbal. This is anechoic, etc. So what are some of my favorite resources for generating programming? So first, I mean, obviously, I have access to the Lovaas curriculum, which is fantastic, which is amazing. But what you can do is you can get this book called A Work in Progress by Ron Leaf and John McCacken, because that outlines a lot of programming very stepwise, and it has a lot of other good information for you. And also, it's good to recommend to parents because it's a very user-friendly book. I found it to be very user-friendly. Teaching Language to Children with Autism and Other Developmental Disabilities, the Sundberg and Partington Manual, big fan, like that book, and it's very, very useful because the things in here are different than the things in here. And I think that it's important for us as the people that are developing the programs to be able to have more than just this one little boxy kind of repertoire of skills that we're using. I think having the Me book, or Teaching Developmentally Disabled Children by Dr. Lovaas, is critical because you have to know where all this stuff came from, and you have to know, why people are doing what they're doing now. It's not just, hey, I'm using the ABLES, I'm using the VB map, I'm using this other pre-written curriculum. It's like you have to know the history. So I would like you to purchase that so that you know the history. And also this book, Teaching Individuals with Developmental Delays by Dr. Lovaas, is also a great resource because it covers a lot of the early language programming, but very specifically states, first you have to do this, and then you have to do that. Then you can start this program, as well as telling you how to teach it. Of course, we have Skinner's books, The Philosophy of Behaviorism, because if you're a behaviorist or a behavior analyst or a behavior scientist, however you refer to yourself, obviously we want to know the philosophy, not just the methodology. And then here we go. Here's our rules and regulations, basically, on teaching behavior, which is a fantastic book that I think every single person on the planet should own. But then there's this book, which isn't so well known. It's called The Autistic Child by Dr. Lovaas, and it's right here. And in this book, this is a pretty thick book full of like goodies that I think that you would be interested in, because he talks very, very specifically about individual kids, specific cases, outlines their data, says, here's why we had to do this 1,500 times. Here's with this kid, we only had to do it 5 times. Here were some of our challenges. Here's how we resolve them. I think that that's a great book, published a long time ago, but you can still find it on Amazon. Anyway, those are some of my favorite resources. Now, before we even talk about programming, we have to talk about what typical development is and why you need to know it, because our learners are atypically developing children. That doesn't mean that every single thing that we do with them or the way that we view them should be atypical. That's why they are children with autism, right? Because they're children. They have to have fun, and they have to play, and they have to run around. And of course, they have to learn how to be effective communicators and interact with their families, etc. But it's important for us, again, as the people developing the programs, that we have to know what typical development looks like in order to really figure out where our kids are. It's not enough to just collect baseline data in some particular skill domain. What's really important is that when you first meet a child, like typical development, like the list of what happens at different ages, is already in your head. It is kind of cycling through, and as you're interacting with the child, little red flags are going off for the things that are challenging, and little green flags, you see them for the things that they do that are age appropriate. And so our kids have lots of different learner profiles. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that tonight. What I want to do is I want to just show you the ASHA website, because there's so much information online about typical development that it's hard to pick and choose like what's the best or what's the most efficient or what's just a really good collection of stuff. And so what I found is what's on the ASHA website is just a really good collection of stuff, because how does your child hear and talk? And this is everything, well, not everything. It's a lot of information that we need to know as the people that are developing programs. I also feel that this is important for parents, way, way important for parents, because it's one thing to have a child with a developmental delay. It's another thing to understand how delayed they are, what you can be doing in their free time. Because if you have a 3-year-old that is currently functioning on like a 12 to 18-month-old level, then doing 3-year-old stuff with them may be very challenging, but doing 12 to 18-month-old stuff with them might actually be more beneficial, make them successful, make them more motivated, and maybe even offer you some opportunities to teach some of the things that you are looking to teach. So I strongly recommend that parents, professionals, paraprofessionals, or anyone interested in learning more about child development go on the ASHA website and just start clicking through some of these links and making some notes and just memorize everything that's on there. It'll be really easy. So anyway, so I just give this example, like what if your learner is 7 and functions on a 24-month-old level and has no vocal language and has never been in an ABA program before? So what programs are you going to select and why? So yes, you can fill out the charts that you're going to fill out, collect the baseline that you're going to collect, and you're going to come up with a set of programs. But now look at that set of programs and just say, okay, well, I mean, he's he's 7, but he kind of functions on like a 2-year-old level, but he has all of these random splintered skills. How am I going to make all of this fit together more like a puzzle than just a bunch of charts? Because when it fits together like a puzzle, it makes more sense to the child. And so that's where your understanding of typical development comes in, because after you have all of your data and you have your programming ideas, you should match that up with typical development and then start assembling how everything's going to go over the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, a year. And as you're programming and as you're working with the child, you, the programmer, should be constantly assessing and evaluating rates of acquisition within each program, within each skill domain after every response. And you should know when to make sure that you are probing and generalizing, et cetera, right? Because we're going to talk about some programs tonight that I'm going to refer to as a teach one and probe for generalization, because there's a lot of stuff we're going to talk about tonight that does not require a lot of rote memorization. What it requires is for our learners to think and for us to be able to teach them to think. So let's keep going. So why language communication should be the primary focus of your child's program? Well, being an effective communicator may decrease the likelihood of challenging behavior. I mean, that's just kind of a given, right? Because obviously any component of an effective behavior intervention plan is functional communication training. But like I said earlier, it has to go beyond that. It can't just be, when a child wants something and they're told no and they tantrum and you get that behavior under control, you teach them to say okay, or you teach them some other alternative thing to say maybe they can have it later, et cetera. It's, there's something more about that, because there's something more going on, let's just say, with the automaticity of how quickly kids default to problem behavior. I'm sure you've all worked with kids that when they've said cookie and you say no, boom, they're just on the floor screaming, whining, and crying. So certainly that has a tremendous amount to do with their history of reinforcement and what happens after they tantrum, especially if people give in, et cetera. But the way that I would look at it is like, wow, that kid is not an effective communicator at all. So what else can we be doing besides teaching him to tolerate no and maybe say something else? What's the programming around all of that? Does he need a lot of negation programming, like I don't want to wait, or I want that now, things like that? Anyway, the primary focus on communication may alleviate some or all of the need for tokens, timers, and other things that make the teaching arrangement vastly different than the natural environment. So just a couple of comments about tokens and timers and things like that. I understand that a lot of kids benefit from them and that they can be very, very effective. And I also understand that they can be very effective at controlling the behavior of the staff, and it facilitates consistency, et cetera. But also something to think about, especially for parents and for paraprofessionals, is sometimes the surprise of reinforcement is what shapes up behavior faster. Because if you master the art of differential reinforcement, which is matching the quality of the learner's response with the amount or quality of reinforcement, and that is critical. And I have to say that it's probably one of the most important things that doesn't get talked about a whole lot. But if you master the art of differential reinforcement, I really think that the surprise of reinforcement and the variation in the magnitude and intensity of reinforcement shapes up a lot of different behaviors. And eventually, you only want to use the table for the introduction of language skills and then master them away from the table. So obviously, early learners and some intermediate level programming, you're going to have kids sitting at a table, or you're going to have them in some kind of static position, and you're going to be showing them pictures and worksheets and flashcards, and they're going to master stuff at the table. But it's better to be able to do that away from the table. And I know that some of you might be saying, well, I work with this kid. He can't do anything away from the table. He's only standing, he's only sitting still when he's at the table. If he goes away from the table, he's running here, he's running there. Well, then maybe we need to look at why he's running here and running there, and why he can't just stand 3 feet from the table, or walk around the classroom with you, or walk around the house with you, or walk around the house with his parents while you're instructing them via a telesession, right? So maybe we need to put some focus on that. And also, when kids have enough behavior, enough vocal behavior, enough communicative behavior, enough vocal language and concepts, we can explain the expectations for their behavior. Because it's one thing to say to a learner and present them with a visual, say, first work, then whatever their reinforcer is going to be. It's another thing. So that's one thing, and that makes sense. And I do that a lot, but I also try to get rid of that stuff as quickly as possible, because I want to be able to use it, present it, make sure that the child kind of understands what that contingency means, and then start just saying it and seeing if me saying it exerts the same kind of control over their behavior as me saying it and presenting the visual simultaneously. Just something to think about. Okay, prerequisite skills to a lot of language training is just critical, because there are, I'm going to call them shortcuts. And like, I'll give you a basic one is, and I actually talk about it tonight, where I'm going to talk about a lot of expressive language programming, where you're going to ask kids things and they are going to say their responses. I don't outline a lot of the receptive language training programming, because my preference is to start with the expressive forms of the programs. If a kid uses a device, I'm just going to have them go right on their device, because instead of having them touch pictures on a table and then work on them being able to do a similar task on their device, I'd rather just do it on their device. So the same thing with kids with vocal language. If I want to say, instead of saying touch phone, I might just say, what's this? Phone. And they say phone. I say, what's this? And they say phone. Do some distractors, and then I'll ask them again. And so, and of course, using multiple exemplar training, et cetera. So that's a shortcut, doing the expressive programming first and then probing backwards to the receptive steps, just to make sure you're not missing anything. So it doesn't always have to be, oh, we're going to target the receptive step, then we're going to do the expressive step, or we're going to do, this, and then so yes, there are sequences we're going to talk about. Doesn't mean you have to adhere to every single step, because actually, as your learner learns, you should be able to probe through a lot of the higher level programming when the programming is assembled correctly, like a puzzle. And literally, the program you're working on now gets absorbed into the next level program, so there isn't a whole lot of need for maintenance and retention probes, et cetera. So let's look at all the potential prerequisite skills necessary to answer the question, what did you do in school today? And note I use the word potential because not all learners will require every skill, obviously. So I just want to give this as an example because there are a lot of ways to kind of like cheat around teaching, this with like pictures and notes home from school and et cetera. And kids bring their art projects, or maybe they did something and they show it to you and you say, oh, so what did you do in school today? And then they said art, or they said drawing, or they, or older kids like, we did math. Okay, well, that's probably what they did. But to really understand what that question means, we have to look at the prerequisite skills. So to really be able to respond to a what question, we need all our matching programs, receptive identification of objects and pictures, some expressive labeling of objects, pictures, functions, locations, WH discrimination. You need a lot of that stuff. So that's just to understand what. Then we look at this word, did. So did is a critical component of that question because did really has to exert very specific control over the child's behavior. Like did should signal to them that they have to think about something that they did that happened in the past and not just what they're doing now, right? Because if you think about a lot of the programming that you do, a lot of it is, what are you doing right now? Like the kids telling you what they're doing right now, what they're seeing right now, what they're looking at, and what you're doing, et cetera, what's going on over there. But for did, we need some receptive actions, expressive actions. We need go, went, past tense verbs. We need all the past tense must be generalized and a time delay that's implemented to build the skill of remembering, and possibly other verb tense programs depending on the child. Now, of course, you can go to our YouTube page where I did give a whole presentation on verb tenses and how to get kids from the most basic receptive actions program to actually having past, present, and future tense in their conversation. So you can check that out. Looking at the word you, we need some basic receptive and expressive pronouns. We need our body parts. And of course, because that's all a big part of teaching pronouns, we need some prepositions and possibly others depending on the child. So the prerequisite skills for the word do are similar to the prerequisite skills to did. For in, we need prepositions, receptive labels, receptive colors, receptive shapes, because that's basically the sequence before prepositions, which is labels, color, shapes. We talked about that during our last workshop. Then the word school, you need your picture labels, room labels, people labels, receptive community locations. And then today you need temporal discriminations and a vast number of other prerequisite skills. So let's just make sure that everything is okay. All right, sorry. All right, so prior to answering this kind of question in a natural manner, the learner requires a number of prerequisite skills. Okay, now, I just got a text from Marcia because I did not mention that if you are getting CEUs, you have to write down 3 keywords tonight. And this is important because, like I said, if you're getting CEUs, this is how we track your attendance. So there's going to be 3 keywords that I'm going to say, and then you are going to write them down and you're going to send them to me in an email. And that's how we're going to send you the certificate and the PowerPoint. So right now, your first keyword is spoon. Spoon. If you need me to help you spell it, I don't think so. Anyway, so I'm not going to repeat the keywords again. Your first keyword is spoon, and I will try to remember to give you your next keyword sooner than later. Okay, so let's keep going. So in this presentation, I'll be focusing on expressive labels. Okay, while the receptive language training, like I was talking about, it is a critical component of language programming. I suggest, and just try it. Give your learner the benefit of the doubt that they might actually be able to do it. Probe the expressive versions of the receptive program. Attempting to transfer from receptive to expressive, or teaching the expressive program first and then probing through the receptive language program. Okay. So let's talk about what. So we're going to start with object picture labels, with the SDs, what is it? What's this? Or tell me what this is. Okay, so I would like to suggest that you randomize all the SDs with your learners when you first start teaching this. I do agree that there are some learners, and I work with a couple where we have to start with one specific SD to teach them some very specific kind of responding, and I get it. But big picture is you want to go into it with multiple SDs because you're going to build generalized responding to multiple SDs right into the teaching. You're going to say, you're going to present the item and say, what is it? You're going to say, what's this? You're going to say, tell me what this is. You might even say, this is, and then let them fill in the blank. So let's start here. So this is where some of this programming starts. We start at object picture labels with what is it? And then here's your instructional sequence. So with the stimuli, you absolutely need multiple exemplars, right? It's very, very difficult to get kids to generalize when you're just teaching one picture. So some recommendations for collecting stimuli. So let's just say you want to teach your learner toothbrush. Well, you need a picture of their toothbrush, of a different toothbrush, and then you want to get these pictures that are like gradients, like that are variations. That on one end of the spectrum, you have like a black and white line drawing of a toothbrush, and then you have something like a black and white picture, then a real picture, and then like a cartoon drawing, and then the picture of their actual toothbrush, something like that. Like there have to be variations, not just 5 pictures of toothbrushes that look like there's something that you see in real life. You have to have these abstractions, the abstract versions of those things. And again, that won't be for every single learner, but the big picture is you want to go into the teaching with just thinking about, I want to do multiple SDs, I want to do multiple exemplars, and I want my exemplars to be a variety of abstractness, from something that's very abstract to something that they see every day. So next in the sequence, you have expressive location. Now remember, we're talking about WH discrimination, right? We're trying to figure out how to put all of this together. Now, I'm not going to outline all of the prerequisite skills because I'm going to outline some of them here, right, in the descriptions. So we do object picture labels, and that takes care of your what's. And then your expressive locations, which is where is it, where's this, or tell me where this is. And of course, you have some prepositions as your prerequisite to expressive locations, but we're not going to talk about that because that's a whole separate programming sequence that will require a significant amount of time. So we have your what's, your what is it, we have your where is it, and then we get some people ID where we're going to do who is it. So here are your SDs. Who is it? Who's this? Who is that? Tell me who this is. And the learner states, okay, there's a little typo there. Sorry about that. So the learner states the person's name, and you need multiple exemplars of people the learner interacts with every day, plus pictures of some of their favorite characters. You don't have to, now, when you're teaching kids to identify characters from their favorite TV shows, you don't have to like maintain them forever, because if you're working with a very young child who watches some cartoon and they like it and you teach them the characters, but when they lose interest in that show, is it really that important to maintain those character names? Probably not. So you just go on to whatever they're currently interested in. But anyway, but you definitely want to teach them multiple exemplars of the people that they interact with. They want mom, dad, brothers, sisters, grandma, grandpa, whomever is in their family. And the multiple exemplars, again, should be with these people, should be like their face, their body, hair up, hair down. If they wear glasses, glasses on, glasses off, different color shirts, jackets, sweaters, scarves, everything, so that, again, the learner's looking at not just 5 pictures of a parent where that kind of looks like the parent that they see every day, but they see these 5 different versions of their parent, because we just want everything to transfer easier over to the natural environment. And I know that not everyone looks exactly the same every single day. Okay, so now we have to randomize the previously acquired. So we're doing what versus who, and we're going to have a random and rapid presentation of the what versus who SDs and stimuli. Okay, so yes, they're discriminating, but it's really just teaching. You're starting to intersperse what they already know, and you're making sure that there's no latent responding, because if there's latency and it either increases or the child has always had some latent responding and you've just been saying to yourself and the team, well, let's just give them a few seconds to respond. So at some point you have to fix the latency, or at least try. And there are some kids that just have latent responding, and but that's fine, because as long as you have tried and and you've done an analysis and how long do they actually have to wait, can I do it faster, can I implement some rate building exercises and see if that helps fix some of the latent responding, and if it doesn't after some period of time, well, then you know what you have. But if they do get faster, that's going to be great. Or if they don't have latent responding, then that's going to be even better, because now you know that you'll be able to go very, very quickly with your stimuli, and you're going to randomize who versus what. Okay, so now we're going to do who versus what versus where. Okay, so now same thing. Variety of stimuli all in a pile. Just start going through it quickly, and you just want to say, and you want to use all of your SDs. So, and I know that some of you are already doing this. You write on the back of the picture card or whatever stimuli that you're using, you write the SDs that correspond to that picture, or at least that the child is actually is learning or has learned. And you want the learner responding quickly and correctly with little to no latency. Again, if latency develops because now it's a little more complex and maybe there are some discrimination errors, then you know that you can definitely try to fix that. So the interspersal of all previously acquired responses in the target programs are the stimuli that you're going to be using, and your prerequisite skill are just the previously acquired responses. So next we come to expressive actions. So what is the blank doing? So let's talk about that for a second. Action programming is a very long sequence, because you start from present tense, then go to past tense, and then go to future tense, and it has to go across media, and it is such a critical element to kids being able to be effective communicators. All right, so, but before we do what is the blank doing, what is the boy, girl, man, woman, baby doing, please don't ask the question, what is he, she, they doing, unless the child has mastered and generalized all of their pronouns. Because I think that what's going to happen is a child's just going to either just kind of rotely imitate what you're saying, or make a pronoun error, and then you spend a lot of time trying to fix it, or they just ignore that word, and then they may actually leave the pronoun out from their response. Or even if the child can talk in 2, 3, 4, 5 word utterances, they may just give you a single word response because that pronoun just doesn't mean anything. So only ask what is he, she, they doing after those pronouns have been mastered and generalized in your pronouns program. So right now you're going to say, what is the boy, girl, man, woman, baby doing? And the learner is going to state the action plus ing. Now, your supporting programs for actions to implement either before or simultaneously, I would recommend before, depending on what other programming you have going on, should be gender identification, right? You have your gender matching, then gender identification, then gender labeling. And so it's just pictures of people that they know and that they don't know. First, they have to sort them into boys, girls, men, women, and babies, and then they have to receptively identify them and then expressively identify them. And then, you know, is so-and-so a man or a woman? Is so-and-so a boy or a girl, etc. So that programming can take a long time. So again, these are supporting programs. I've seen a lot of programs where people just jump to this and they don't have this. And sometimes the kids actually figure out like who is a boy, a girl, a man, a woman, and a baby from this teaching. So that's fine. So right now, what you have is this. You have what versus where versus who versus what doing. And so in this video is the entire sequence of all the action programs that I'm thinking about or that I'm talking about. So you have your present tense, past tense, future tense, and you can go to our YouTube page and click on that video and you can see the entire sequence of actions. So like I said, tonight we're just focusing on WH discrimination and how to get it there. And again, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the prerequisite skills to all of these programs. We're just kind of talking about how to kind of put this stuff together and the order to do it in, right? So now we have what versus where versus who versus what doing. Again, the SD is the rapid interspersal of all previously acquired responses, all previously acquired SDs, and the learner should respond quickly, correctly, and with little to no latency. Okay, very good. We don't have to talk about latency again. Okay, so now we actually get to the WH discrimination component. So here's what's going to be important, that you collect pictures of family members in different rooms of the house performing different actions, and be sure to collect at least 5 pictures per family member. So you have a picture of mom, she's in the living room, she's reading a book, and like again, the like same thing, like she has her hair up in one picture, the next picture she has her hair down. So maybe she's cutting something on a cutting board in the kitchen, or maybe she's driving her car and she's in the park, or something like that. The goal is that these are people that the child knows. These are locations that have been mastered in the Expressive Locations program. They are actions that have been mastered in the Actions program. And now you are randomizing all of these responses. Who is this? What are they doing? What's this? Where are they? And the child can just give these answers very, very quickly. It's really so important that they're responding quickly. It's becoming like the theme of the night. I wasn't even planning on like doing that, but I can't stress it enough that when your kids are responding quickly, and I know that some of you know this because I know some of you are big on rate building and making sure that latency is not negatively impacting your learners' programs. So fast responding, little to no latency, randomizing who, what doing, where. Okay, so here are some notes about doing all of that. So you can probe responding with the recommended stimuli to determine the current level of difficulty for your learner. But it's not necessary to force the discrimination of all the SDs immediately, because this will most likely be one of the first times that your learner will be required to attend to multiple components of a picture. Because you've just spent a lot of time probably in like object labels, specifically getting kids to attend to something in a picture and to ignore everything else that's going on in the picture. Or some of you are spending a lot of time isolating the image of just what you want to teach and having it on a white background. So now you're showing a kid a picture where all the information that's in the picture is relevant, right? And one thing to remember is that when you're doing this kind of WH discrimination, who, what, where, what doing, etc., with family members and rooms of the house and the locations that are mastered, make sure that there are multiple pictures from each location, because you don't want your learner to see a picture of dad at the supermarket and there's a blue box of like some cereal in the background, and because of the blue box, that's why your learner can respond correctly to the question where. You want to have a few pictures of dad in the supermarket doing different things, etc. So you're probably going to have more than 5 pictures of each. You can start with the 5 around the house, but of course you want to probe for generalization at some point, and it's good to have about 30, 40, or 50 other pictures to probe so that you can determine whether your learner is actually making the jump to WH discrimination, to novel WH discrimination, or if you have to continue just pounding out every single discrimination. So, and you have to randomize the pictures every few trials again, because the one picture of your learner's brother playing a video game on the couch in the living room isn't the target. WH discrimination is. So you run through some questions on one picture, you prompt as you feel necessary, you go to the next picture. Prompt as you feel necessary, go to the next picture. Prompt because the target is who versus what doing versus where. If you have to isolate a picture, you do have to do that sometimes, all right? But I would really try a bunch of different teaching procedures first, or really targeting the sequence of the WH questions. So still use multiple pictures, but limit which questions that you're asking until your until your learner starts to develop the understanding of WH discrimination. Again, the target is WH discrimination, not WH discrim with one picture. Because like I said, of course, if needed, you can always go back to targeting one picture. You do not ask all the questions for every picture, every presentation, because what's going to happen is your learner is going to figure out the little pattern that you're teaching in. He's going to hear these 3 or 4 questions, and some of our kids are really good at knowing what we're going to ask when presented with specific stimuli. And so they hear this question, and now that gets eliminated as a potential response for the other ones. So when you're going through the picture, the pile of pictures, you say, who's this? What are they doing? Where are they? What are they doing? Who's this? Who's this and where are they? What are they doing? Who's that? What are they doing? Who's this? What's that? Where are they? What are they doing? Where are they? Where are they? Where are they? And you keep going through the pictures so that the question you're asking is completely random. That's how you know that your learner is actually learning WH discrimination and not memorizing some weird pattern where you show them a picture and you just say, who is this? What's this? What are they doing? Where are they? And then you go to the next one. Who's this? What's this? What are they doing? Where are they? Then you pick up the next picture. Who's this? What's this? What are they doing? Where are they? I mean, obviously, you know, the kid's going to figure that out. So don't ask all the questions, every picture, every presentation. Now, teaching errorlessly. We all love teaching errorlessly, but at this level, making mistakes is important. Self-correcting is important. So if you show a picture of someone performing some action in some specific location, so there's a brother catching a Frisbee in a park, and you say, who's this? And the child says, park, or it's the park. And you say, that's not who this is. Who is this? And you can overemphasize who, and then they look at the picture again and they go, oh, yeah. And then they say, Jim. You're like, yes, that's your brother Jim. That's correct, right? So it doesn't always have to be, who's this? Jim. Who's this? Jim. Clap your hands. Set your head. What's your name? Who's this? And then and then doing that whole errorless teaching thing. It's important for kids to make mistakes at this level because not everything has to be taught errorlessly. Not everything has to be rote memorization. Remember, this is programming that should force the learner to think. Think about what you're saying. Think about how they're going to respond as well. Now, the proper implementation of differential reinforcement is critical to this program, right? Because sometimes kids are going to self-correct when they have an opportunity to be wrong. So after they're wrong, you might even just wait a few seconds and just look at them and just kind of like, is that your final answer? And then they say something different. And then they get it right. And you're like, wow, that was fantastic figuring that out. Give me 5, pal. So again, the proper implementation, differential reinforcement, critical in this program to shape correct discrimination and to avoid rote memorization, which is not WH discrimination. Because I've seen a lot of kids that can answer a lot of questions about pictures, but when presented with novel stimuli, have a tremendous amount of difficulty. Okay, we're going to talk about when. All right. So understanding how to respond to a when question can be taught via memorized responding as a basic form of when responding. In order for your learner to understand the temporal nature of responding to when questions, additional and difficult programming must be mastered and generalized, okay? So let's just talk about a couple of things. So here are some questions that kids are just taught to memorize. When do you sleep? When do you wake up? When do you eat lunch? When do you eat dinner? When do you eat breakfast? When do you go to school? When do you go to church? When do you eat turkey? When do you see Santa? When do you go trick-or-treating? When is your birthday? All totally fine to memorize because you know what? That's just good information for kids to have. But does it help them understand the temporal relationship of what they're saying to the environment? I probably not. So there's a lot of other programming that has to be done, that has to go into place. And you're going to think that it's not related to when, but it actually is. You know, because when you say, when did you go to the store? When are you going to the birthday party? When did you read a book? So your learner should be able to give you some kind of answer. It doesn't have to be pinpoint accurate at 6:46 tonight I read my book. It just has to be yesterday, today, tomorrow, in 5 minutes, in a little while. Now, later, before, after. First I did this, next I did that, last. Like these are all the words that help facilitate an understanding of when things occur. So there are many prerequisites that range from basic to advanced. Too many to note in this particular presentation. So, but the next set of slides will outline a couple of programming sequences that may be required for your learner to start to understand when as a concept. I mean, at the very least, I think it'll give the programmers, the parents, the paraprofessionals, some idea about why they're doing what they're doing, because that can be a missing element to teaching kids with autism. I've seen a lot of people that are great at teaching kids, but if you ask them, hey, why are you teaching them first last, or why are you teaching them big little, or why are you teaching them to answer what size, that's what they have. It's the program, right? Well, that's certainly an answer, but it's better for them to understand, well, because I know that in order to get to the eventual goal of him understanding how to answer a when question, instead of just me training him to answer a bunch of when questions, I know that he has to do these things first to help his understanding of when. So anyway, one thing to remember, teaching when as a man can start early in programming with the use of a timer and as an extension of the waiting program, okay? Because there are lots of kids that have difficulty waiting. And so the learner asks for a cookie, you say, let's wait, and then you set a timer for some amount of time, and then maybe they have a tantrum or maybe they don't. So okay, now we have to run this whole waiting program. So again, more than just teaching them to tolerate waiting, they can ask when, right? For example, learner asks for his iPad. You say, you can't have it yet. Learner doesn't know what yet means, and that whole thing just sounds like one big no. So you're probably gonna have some problem behavior. But then immediately you prompt the learner to say, when can I have it? Or if the learner can't say that, but they can say when iPad, or they have a device, they go when iPad. Oh, then you say, okay, in 5 minutes. And then you set a timer, you sit it down right in front of them and they stare at it, which is totally fine to start this kind of teaching. The timer ticks down, the timer buzzes, rings, or it's a little red felt that they can see that the time is closing basically. Then when the timer rings, when the learner should be requesting their iPad. If they don't, or if they are not enthusiastic, then you should model, yay, I got my iPad, or do something so that there's a difference between when they asked for it, how they had to kind of negotiate with, when can I have it, and then they finally get it. There should be some emotional responding, and you can model that for them. And you can even have, I'm sure that you've done a great job at teaching your kids to imitate especially imitating the actions of a third person. So if they watch something with their siblings or their parents or a classmate, and that person exhibits a very specific exuberant responding, maybe they'll start doing the same thing, which would make sense, right? So that's what I'm talking about when I say it's not just about the behavior plan and the functional communication training. It's definitely about giving them more language than they might otherwise need. And in this example, how to respond once they actually get their reinforcer, which is something that's not always taught. Sometimes kids just get their reinforcer and you say, wait, wow, that was great waiting. Here's your iPad. And then the kid takes it and they just, do their thing. But, they don't say thanks. They don't be like, wow, that's awesome. I can't wait to play such and such a game. Or something within your learner's ability to demonstrate that they're excited to have their reinforcer. Okay, so here's how all of this starts at the most basic level with your sequencing program. Now, I have a big problem with sequencing, and I'll tell you why. Somewhere in this office, I have a box of pictures where you can put 5 or 6 pictures in front of a kid, and you can say, put these in order. And they put them in order, and they master everything in the set, and some kids even learn to tell the story. And then when the box goes away, they have no idea what sequencing is, or really what first, next, and last means, or it's so confined to that little set. So there's a couple of things. One, you can start with the set, but teach one and probe for generalization across all the other sets. Is your learner actually acquiring the ability to sequence? If they're not, well, then you teach the next one, and then you probe for generalization across the rest. Now, what my preference is at the same, so even though I may use the pictures from that sequencing box, I'll have pictures of things that the kid does every day, so that it makes, now this is just my 2 cents. I think it makes more sense to them. So if I take pictures of like 5, 6, or 7 steps of them brushing their teeth, or getting dressed, or pouring some cereal and then eating it, or opening their favorite candy, or actually like the sequence of buttons they have to touch to get to their favorite video on YouTube or something. I mean, those are things that make sense to the kid because they're things that they do every day. And you use those things as your sequencing cards. Now, back to the toothbrushing example, we know that when you build a task analysis for toothbrushing, how many steps are there? 7, 9, 10, 12? I mean, it just depends. So you're going to start with just 3 pictures, and the kid's going to put them in order. And then when you probe for generalization, you give him the whole set. Or you can even have him go and brush his teeth, and you label everything that they're doing, and you ask them, and you just interact with them kind of naturally while they're brushing their teeth. You go back, you give them the target response, which is 3 or 4 pictures, and then you give them all 12 pictures, and you say, put these in order. Now, with younger kids, they don't have to get all 12 pictures in order, because that would just be silly. I mean, some can, and that's fantastic, but that's not my expectation. I'm looking for about 80% of them to be in some kind of order, right? Especially if they don't see those pictures a lot, they're trying to figure out exactly like what is happening in each picture. But it's the combination of using the sequencing set plus using these pictures of the things that they do in real life or things that they see every day, right? So it just starts with put in order the receptive sequencing. That's the first step to teaching and understanding of when. And of course, your prerequisite skills are object identification and block imitation, because those are the 2 skills, because here you have some pre-sequencing stuff, and here you have your labeling, and that's what goes into the sequencing programming. And then you move on to some patterns, right? And you're asking the questions, what comes next? Or what goes here? And you can do the same thing with blocks. You can do it with a worksheet. You can do it with some other kind of manipulative. You can do it with the pictures of the self-care skill, or some other sequence pictures of things that the child does every day. Um, and this is what you do. You say, oh, touch. Oh, we went ahead. We can't jump ahead. Oh, sequencing with patterns. What comes next? What goes here? And your stimuli and your receptive sequencing is the prerequisite. Now, nothing's mastered until the learner has generalized the response. It's not just 90 to 100% across X number of days, or 5 consecutive Ys, and then it's mastered and you're going to move on to the next program. Constantly present the learner with novel stimuli and place the same or similar demands on them. And either they can do it or they can't. And if they can't, then you're probably going to teach one more response and then probe for generalization again, right? So here we are, probing for generalization, because the goal is thinking. The goal is not just rote responding. So let's see. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now you're going to take the sequencing work and you're going to generalize it to academic work, because I just mentioned worksheets, right? Patterns and sequences are all early math skills, and so there's nothing wrong with doing that. I personally don't like spending a lot of time on that kind of stuff. But yes, but it will be important to generalize it to some academic work. But now you're going to start receptive first and last. You're going to put some objects on the table and you're going to say, touch the object first and object last. And the learner they absolutely have to touch the objects in the order that you stated. Otherwise, their response is wrong. And I literally have had arguments, and they were arguments with other professionals and parents about, oh, well, he touched both of them. Doesn't matter. If it was the wrong order, the answer is wrong, because you said first, touch the car, then last, touch the house. And if they didn't touch it in that order, then the follow-up questions don't matter. What did you touch first? What did you touch last? And the learner has to say, I touched the car first. I touched the house last. Okay, so your stimuli are going to be common objects, but your prerequisites are past tense verbs, opposites, chained receptive labels, pronouns. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of work that goes into this program, but it just gives you some idea about how the programming goes around these sequences that I'm talking about tonight. Okay, so it's not just jumping in with first and last, it's making sure that these other programs are generalized, not only mastered, but generalized first. So let's not get hung up on just mastery, because mastery is awesome. I love it when kids master stuff, but I love it even more when I hear them or see them using a skill that was taught during a teaching session outside of the teaching session. Or I say to the parents, tell me something like amazing that happened since I last saw you. Because sometimes we get very caught up with, well, what kind of challenges did you have? What's not going well? Well, but maybe he actually said, hey, first I did this and last I did that. And while it's not the most grammatically correct thing to say, let's just say most natural thing to say, isn't that interesting that he used the words that he was taught during the teaching session out in the natural environment? Because the rest of the upcoming programming is going to fill in all those little blanks for him. So now we have first and last actions where you're going to say, perform this action first, perform that action last. Same follow-ups. What did you do first? What did you do last? Now, like I said with the other programming, don't ask both questions all the time, every response, and don't ask them in the same order, because your learner will recognize the pattern, and then that will inadvertently cue him as to what he's supposed to say, and then he's not going to be able to use it outside of the teaching session. Okay, let's go with our next keyword. So if you are watching and you're getting CEUs, your next keyword is book. That's book Again, book. That's your key word, okay? So just don't forget, at the end of the presentation, write down all of your keywords, send them to me in an email, ray@abaskills.com. That's Ray, R-A-Y, @abaskills.com, and I will make sure that you get your certificate and a copy of the PowerPoint. Okay, first and last actions, right. So our prerequisite skills, first and last labels, past tense actions. So you've seen that twice already. So past tense actions is really going to be important because look at what you're asking. What did you do first and last? So here's that word did that we talked about earlier. You know, what did you do in school today? Well, you're asking a question that has about anywhere from like let's say a half hour to a 2 hour time delay from the time the child ends school, gets on a bus and gets home, or you wind up picking him up or her up, and then you get them home and everyone's settled, everything, and you say, oh, so what did you do at school today? This is happening right in the moment. Clap first, touch your head last. So what did you do first? Well, if the child can't answer that question 18 inches away from you after they just did it, it's going to be really hard for them to answer what did you do in school today. So past tense actions is going to be important because, like I said, did has to exert very specific control over your learner's response. As soon as they hear did, they know they're talking about past tense, and they know that they should be adding ed endings, or they should be using their irregular past tense verbs. Very, very important. So next we go to first, last locations, which starts with the house stuff. So your prerequisites are going to be first and last actions. And there's a program called trips where you go around a kid's house and you say, hey, let's go here and do this, and let's go there and do that, and let's go there and do that. And then they, then they have to tell you eventually where you went and what you did, etc. So, but now you're going to go to location first. So go to the kitchen and the bedroom. So where did you go first? I went to the bedroom first. Where did you go last? I went to the kitchen, etc. Okay, and that is easy. Teach one, probe for generalization. If the kid can memorize, if he can only memorize the one location, if you can only memorize, the one pair of locations, then that's going to be challenging. So you're going to have to practice random combinations every single time that you present the SD, and then probe for generalization with different combinations. So you may have to write down like how many rooms are in the house. If it's an apartment and you have a few rooms, you're going to be limited with the number of combinations. But it doesn't matter. So then you space out the frequency of practice, right? You do a couple trials now, do a couple trials in 15 minutes, do a couple trials a half hour later, and that just reduces some of the practice effects. If you have a big house, then do any random number of trials in different rooms, different combinations, etc. Because again, the target is him being able to respond to where did you go first and where did you go last. The target is not going to the two locations, not going to the kitchen, etc. Okay. Well, actually, that's why this is a prerequisite skill, because being able to go to the locations along with verb tenses should actually have shaped up those behaviors. Okay, so first and last locations with the time delay. So here we are, first and last locations. In number of minutes, we'll go to the location. The instructor sets a timer. Then they say, when are we going to the location? So if you say, hey, in 5 minutes, we're going to the kitchen. When are we going to the kitchen? Your learner should say in 5 minutes. And then you set a timer. And you can do another activity in that 5 minutes. And when the timer rings, you say, oh, where are we going? And he says, oh, we're going to the kitchen. Fantastic remembering. Excellent. Let's go to the kitchen. And you bring them to the kitchen, or you bring them to the location, and there's something that's reinforcing in that location for him, right? Because the target is, when are we going? He just has to remember what you said. And he has a visual representation of it on a timer. So it should make the initial responding easy. And of course, you're going to fade all that stuff out, right? So first, last locations with the time delay. So next, you provide instruction on how to read a digital clock, which shouldn't be terribly difficult, because as long as you're learner knows numbers and can do matching the sample, then, and they can do vocal imitation, and maybe they can count to 30, 40, 50, 60, then it shouldn't take that long. You say, what time is it? And you just teach them that the number in front of the colon, is different from the number after the colon, 5 and 30. It's not 530, because that's usually the mistake that kids make. You say it's 530, and then you do a lot of randomized practice, because again, the goal is reading the clock, not reading one particular time. So you just show them different time, different time, different time, then your learner will probably pick it up pretty quickly. But during the teaching, change the SD to include the time. At 2 o'clock, we'll go to the location. So when you start this, there has to be a prominent digital clock in the room. And also, this is a good prerequisite skill for keeping appointments, which is some programming that occurs much later on. But you teach them to attend to the clock. At 2 o'clock, we'll go to the location. And so then you say, when are we going to the location? The child says, at 2 o'clock. So here's the thing. So 2 o'clock rolls around and the child doesn't even notice. And then what's the problem? Well, you probably jumped the interval too much, because it should be 2 o'clock in 1 minute, the very first time that you do that. And the kid should be staring at the clock. And again, they should have that excited response. It's 2 o'clock. And right, exactly. And if they don't have that excited response because they know that reinforcement's available at 2 o'clock, then you have to model that for them. Or maybe that's got to be built into your teaching. You have to make sure that they respond in an excited manner when it gets to be the time to access reinforcement. See how all that kind of fits together? Okay, so then you can add asking when after going to the location. When did we go to the kitchen? At 2 o'clock. Or what did we do first? Well, first we did work, and last we went to the kitchen, or next we went to the kitchen. So next you're going to increase the time delay until you eventually get to today, yesterday, tomorrow. Because once you're at that level, you're probably using like a desktop calendar or something large and visual where your learner can see what happened yesterday, and there might be a little word card on there that says, went to the park, or yesterday they ate 3 Oreos, because they're probably not going to the park right now, but they can certainly eat 3 Oreos, or they could, eat 10 gluten-free chicken nuggets. So you save those chicken nuggets just for this program. So it's special, goes up on the calendar. That's what happened yesterday. But today we're going to watch, 15 minutes of your favorite television show, which would be very unusual to do during a teaching session. So you set a timer for 15 minutes, and then that goes on today. What do you want to do tomorrow? Well, tomorrow I want to eat 10 chicken nuggets and watch my video for 15 minutes. Well, no, sorry, you can't do that. You can pick one or the other, right, etc. But anyway, the point being is that you keep increasing the time until you're actually teaching the child to look at a calendar and it actually makes some sense to him. So especially whether you're doing in-person school or whether you're doing school online, I'm sure that there's a lot of work with the calendar and the weather, and all of that stuff is very meaningful, especially when it gets carried over to your home therapist and or the people doing stuff online, or parents are doing it, because now you're just taking a little snapshot from the calendar, because during their school experience, they look at the whole calendar and they talk about yesterday, today, and tomorrow, but all the numbers are all there, and there's a little sun and there's a little rain and there's clouds and this and that and the other. So you don't have any of that stuff. You just have, this is today, here's yesterday, here's tomorrow, right? And then you just talk about those things in this manner. And mastery is always generalized responding. It is not just some percentage correct or some number of probes correct. And the number of probes correct and the percentage correct just give you some idea that the learner is actually understanding what you're saying, right? But generalized responding, when you're not teaching and you're engaging them in conversation and they don't even know that you're probing, because when you kind of get to this level, kids probably don't know. I'm sorry, the kids know what you're up to. They know what you're doing. They know that you're teaching. They know that you're collecting data. They know, they're looking at your data sheet and they're going, did I get that right? So that's when, you have to start hiding some of that stuff and doing some stuff a little differently. That's what happens when you get to the point where you're working with some advanced learners. Okay, let's get back to our sequence. So we've basically done all of this, right? And now we're adding this. We are going to add, I see. Okay, so we added receptive before and after and expressive before and after with a visual. Okay, so with receptive before after, you're going to put some stimuli out on the table, and you're going to say, touch blank before you touch blank, or touch blank after you touch blank, or perform this action after you you touch that. But in the expressive version, you can start with the actions, you can start with the stimuli. I give the example of just letter and number sequences because some kids, it's just a little bit easier because they already know how to count, they already know how to say the alphabet. So if you say what comes before letter D or what comes after number 6, that may be a good way to get in there with that particular skill. So they understand, they're focused on the words before and after. And again, those words, those temporal words, you're actually making salient, and they exert very specific control over your learner's behavior. Okay, so next you remove the visual, even though the step is not in the chart. Okay, so then we go to before and after with the sequences. So now so it's not, you can start with the sequencing cards that we talked about earlier, but it has to evolve into books, videos, and movies. And you're using some version of this question. What happened before, before so-and-so threw this rock? Or what happened when the dinosaur, like after the dinosaur fell down? Because that not only shows that they're understanding the concept, but you're also having some kind of back and forth kind of exchange with them. And in other programming, because when you get to this level of programming, your kids are probably doing well in some of their conversation programming. And if they're using their devices, they're probably pretty fast at being able to answer social questions and probably doing some reciprocal conversation. And they're doing this kind of programming as well. So when you generalize to books, videos, and movies, everything just seems more like a natural progression. Because this is one of these programs where you, instead of teaching it at the table, you might introduce it at the table or give them some idea of what they're supposed to be doing at the table. And then you bring them over to the couch, you flick on the TV, or you grab a book, or you're watching a video on YouTube, and you're just asking, hey, what happened before so-and-so? Or what happened after that happened? And like maybe they know and maybe they don't. But what's great about the books and the movies and the videos is that you can just go back and show them, because again, it's making an abstract concept salient, because with the book, you're going back a page or forward a page, and with the videos, you're going backward and forwards. Very, very easy to teach, actually. Then you do this, before and after, but when. So you say, when did you or the other person or character action? And then they're going to say before or after he, she, they, name, action. See, so now I'm putting these pronouns in here because at this level, your learner has mastered their pronouns. Even if they have like a little bit of some reversal problem, or they still have some residual discrimination errors, I'm not so concerned about that with pronouns, because typical kids make pronoun errors for quite a long time. And, so I'm not worried about that. As long as when you provide some kind of correction that your learner actually corrects themselves, that's the important part. And the stimuli are multiple forms of media, right? So again, it's not sitting at a table and you're drilling them. It's that you're like, hey, maybe, we just finished a whole bunch of like, I don't know, we just did a math worksheet and we practiced commenting on blah, blah, blah. Why don't we go, take 5 minutes and let's go watch Toy Story? And while you're watching Toy Story, like, I don't know, you try to have some kind of like joking around kind of conversation with them. Like, oh, look at this, look at that. What do you think? What do you think happened before, they like did that? And, well, before he, she, blah, 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 so that it's more of like a natural exchange. And those are your probes for generalization, not necessarily just sitting there with your clipboard and your data sheet and you're, conducting this formal probe, etc. Because again, when you get to this level, it's like a higher level programming. And so you're probably engaging, your child like less discrete trial training and much more like in an introduction to concepts and skills, and then having them practice away from the table and under more natural contingencies, and the reinforcers are much more natural. Like the reinforcer for conversational exchange is socialization, the conversational exchange. Maybe give the kid a high five, give them a little poke, a little tickle, and you're watching. Or, if you're doing it via telehealth, you coach the parent or whomever's with the child ahead of time and say, hey, this is what I want you to do. You're going to watch this video, and every couple of minutes, or I'm going to like buzz you or text you or something, like ask this question. And then if he gets it right, give him some noogies. Like that's just, just the way that kind of programming goes. Anyway, you have to continue to expand the practice to everyday events, times, dates, etc., based on the skill of your learner. Okay. So WH discrimination is generalized. So prerequisites, many abstract language programs, and all prerequisites for the programs noted below. So I just gave you like a quick list just to check what you're doing, because like I said, we can't list all the prerequisites here, and the prerequisites for your specific learner aren't always the same, because these are not roadmaps. These are just guidelines to kind of give you the big picture of how to go from something very basic to something very abstract and complex. And I'm leaving it up to you to fill in the blanks with the prerequisite skills. Okay. So we are running out of time rapidly. So I'm going to go through this because this is not a programming sequence. Rather, it's a depiction of the relationship between direct prerequisite skills and indirect prerequisite skills across skill domains leading up to the categories program. So with the WH discrimination, what I did was just gave you the sequence, like some big picture stuff, like here's how some of this programming fits together, and then leaving it up to you to figure out what the prerequisite skills are for your learner, and to make sure that all those skills are mastered and generalized. Now what I'm going to show you is how a program actually fits with all the other skills that one particular learner was taught. So what I'm going to show you is is like a flow chart of programming, not only for categories, but how I kind of mapped it out for this one particular learner. So it started kind of like with a sketch that looks like this. So each of the boxes, like you've seen, are the current programs plus some of the programs that I wanted to target in categories. And yes, I know it's quite a mess, but it makes sense to me. Okay, so then what we would do, so what his programming looked like is we started with matching identical objects and pictures. And then we went to matching non-identical objects and pictures, and you're very familiar with this kind of sequence. And then we did some category matching. Okay, and now after that, I went down here and did some matching associations. Now the reason why I put this arrow here is because I typically don't do matching associations. I don't remember exactly why I wanted to do that, but I knew that was going to be necessary for some specific language goal. Okay, because there's a couple different versions of associations. There's a very basic one where the kid's matching pictures, like a dog to a doghouse, a lamp to a light, and there are other associations that happen at a more advanced level that not only relate to events in the environment, but also like emotions and interactions with other people, et cetera. Kind of leads to some perspective taking and understanding how teaching the child how their behavior and how they interact with the environment causes the environment to act back on them. So anyway, so after some matching identical objects and pictures, did some picture ID. These broken dotted lines are indirect prerequisite skills or supporting programs, right? So you don't have to do receptive picture ID before you do the category matching, because it's kind of a matching program. It's an extension of matching, but I like to do that. So it's an indirect prerequisite skill. It's a supporting program. So then, after doing the receptive picture ID, you do have to do that before you start receptive categories, which is touch category. And then after I did the receptive picture ID, did the receptive animal ID. Okay, and again, I'm just showing how all of this programming fits together. So it is a direct and an indirect prerequisite to receptive categories in this particular programming sequence because I didn't have to do receptive animal ID to do the receptive categories, but I did. Okay, so now a bunch of stuff happens. So then after receptive categories, I went to the expressive categories with a visual where I say, what's a cat? And the learner says, an animal, right? And I made a note that interspersal may facilitate generalization, right? So interspersal of everything of all the previously acquired. So for some skills, sometimes what I'll do is I'll take all the previously acquired skills and they're just constantly interspersed, not necessarily for maintenance or for retention, but to make sure that the responding is very, very fast because I don't like latency because the faster you're, because just think about it like this. Your learner is going to respond super fast with you. And then when you're not around, the rate of their responding just decreases a little bit back to, let's just say, more of like a natural level. So if you never get them to go fast and you never get them to interact quickly and to respond quickly, then as latent as they're responding is during the therapy, where it's just one-on-one and you're working like 18 inches from your learner, then when you're not there and that kind of demand is not present, then I would assume that the latency is going to increase, right? So let's just keep track of where we are. Receptive picture ID, receptive animal ID goes to expressive animal labels, goes to expressive animal sounds, which are both indirect prerequisite skills to expressive categories with a visual. So what's a noun? So what's a cat? Cat's an animal. What does a cat say? Cat says meow. What animal says meow? A cat. Great. Okay, so let's look at what happens. There's a couple of things that happen here. So I went from receptive picture ID to expressive picture labels to I don't know. So you don't always have to throw this in after expressive picture labels, but I felt it was necessary for this particular learner. I remember there were some very specific errors that he would make and he would get frustrated when he was making errors. And I thought that was good, actually, because we're all supposed to be a little irritated when we don't know how to do something, and then we kind of like struggle to figure out how to do it, and then we feel great when we know how to do it. So I introduced this response to, instead of having a behavior plan and tokens and timers and this, and he can't tolerate, being wrong. Like, why don't we just teach him how to say, I don't know? Because I'd rather him over generalize the I don't know response than have, this whole complex thing going on. Because if I say, what's your name? And he says, I don't know, well, then I know that he's just pulling my leg, right? So expressive picture labels went to I don't know, which is an indirect prerequisite skill to expressive categories without the visual. Okay, now a couple things happened here. So from expressive animal sounds, I introduced the reverse animal sound. So who says blank? And went in and introduced reverse categories. So tell me a category, tell me an animal, a cat, tell me another animal, a dog, right? And all of this gets interspersed. So next, we reverse the format and intersperse all the categories. So now we have, and also simultaneously introduce receptive and expressive looks like, which the SD is touch the one that looks like something, right? So you put out a picture of a rhinoceros, a walrus, and a dog, and you tell your learner, touch the one that looks like an elephant. And I mean, there's a clear choice. And if you did your question discrimination and you've been working on some other programming, then he can probably tell you why he selected that particular, or what features that they share, which is same and different plus Y, which we're going to get to quickly. Oh, then after. So I'm sorry, receptive and expressive looks like, and then we introduced complex categories. Tell me a category plus a qualifier. So tell me an animal that lives on a farm. Now we have to do the complex categories plus negation, okay? Because it's not always about what does the animal do, what does the animal not do, or what does the category not do. Tell me a vehicle that, tell me a vehicle that flies that, that can't action. not feeling very creative right now. I'm sorry. But that's the SD. Tell me a category plus qualifier that does it. Oh, so tell me an animal that lives on a farm that doesn't fly. But before we do that, we have to do our negation programs. And again, I did a whole presentation on various negation forms, which is also available on our YouTube channel. And then from there, we went to tell me three, which isn't really three because it just says that. It says, tell me three vehicles. And say, okay, well, tell me three more, or tell me another one, or tell me one that doesn't do this, or tell me one that's blue, or tell me a vehicle that's red that has a siren that isn't small, something like that, and so that can get expanded. And simultaneously, we're going to introduce this kind of program, category plus a noun. So what's your favorite category? And the learner responds appropriately. Now, before you do that, you're going to run this program called likes versus dislikes. And the learner, and you say, I like or don't like some item from the category. You say, I like hamburgers. And the learner says, well, I don't like hamburgers. And at that point, if your learner doesn't like hamburgers, you should stop working with him immediately. But anyway, but seriously, again, just a reminder, I'm just showing you, so here's your category sequence, because we've looked at a lot of programming sequences that require a lot of additional programming, or but I'm not showing you, but I didn't show you how it all fits into like other programming. So that's what this is. This is how all the programming kind of fits together. All right, so we have your likes versus likes. Your likes versus dislikes. And before doing likes versus dislikes, you would introduce yes versus no with preferred versus non-preferred items. Okay, and even before doing that, you want to do your prepositions, your expressive opposites, and yes, no factual, which is showing the picture of a car and asking the child, is this a car? And they should say yes or no. So that's actually something that my preference of programming is to run that first before doing it with preferred versus non-preferred items. This might get practiced, let's just say inadvertently. I mean, it happens because it just happens every day when you're working with kids, but you just got to monitor that, because you can wind up with a kid that says yes to everything or says no to everything. And then when you try to teach them the other word, then that can be very challenging. Okay, so this is just how the category sequence, so all these categories programs kind of occur in the order that they should occur in based on the complexity and kind of responding. Now, again, categorization, the majority of these category programs are a teach one and probe for generalization program, all right? Because you shouldn't have to teach a learner that there's 20 different animals in the animal category. They should remember from non-identical matching that all of these things share similar features somehow, right? And you probably did some same and different programming around some of the same stimuli. So they already know that the animals share these same features. So you shouldn't have to have a target list that has 20, 30, 40 animals on it. Should have a few. And then each probe for generalization, the percentage correct keeps getting higher and higher and higher till they've achieved about like 85, 90% during a probe for generalization across 30 other non-trained stimuli, untrained stimuli, okay? That's basically the way the categories program works, because you have to have generalized categorization. Otherwise, kids just will have a tremendous amount of difficulty having any kind of conversation. So just quickly, I'm going to go over a flowchart of an entire program. So here's what we've done so far. We looked at some big picture kind of programming sequences with WH discrimination. Then I showed you how the categories programming fits within a larger program, and that's taken from one of my clients. So you can see the other programs that were supporting the categories program, and also kind of like how things were assembled. Now, as far as an entire program goes with across multiple skill domains, I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I'm just going to skip to this because I think I have a couple different versions here as the rate of acquisition is calculated. Okay, so again, calculating the rate of acquisition frequently, like every month, every 2 months, every 3 months, it depends on how many hours of one-to-one that the learner is getting or how many hours of therapy. So, you're doing 30, if now for young kids that are getting 30 to 40 hours a week, the rate of acquisition needs to be calculated pretty frequently. Um, but for older kids or kids that have less hours, you can probably do it every 2 to 3 months, and then put together a chart like this. So here's your language domain, abstract concepts, sentence structure and descriptions, general information, pre-academic skills, and classroom practice. Now, I'm not going to go over all of this because this would be like a 3-hour presentation just in itself on how this one chart got assembled. But I just want to show how I think about this language programming across skill domains, making sure that I'm collecting data on the rate of acquisition and adjusting my programming so that I can develop some predictive values as to what's going to be mastered over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. So again, solid lines are direct prerequisite skills. You probably shouldn't tell me about the picture without having done WH discrimination and some work on sentences and phrases if your learner has some challenges with vocal imitation or producing longer utterances, right? And so the dotted lines are the indirect prerequisite skills or supporting programs that you don't necessarily have to do before the other programs, but it's good to know exactly what you are doing as the person developing the programming. So you can see that there was a huge focus on language development, and then we have a couple of pre-academic skills and some classroom practice because this child was in process of being included and eventually got mainstreamed, which we're very happy about. Okay, let's talk about same and different. So same and different plus why. Here's a little cluster of prerequisites for you. It's not every prerequisite, but it's probably some of the things that you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about an advanced language training such as same and different plus why. So we're looking at object labels, components, or people call it parts of a whole, plurals, opposites, yes and no, likes versus dislikes, question discrimination, functions, categories, prepositions, same, different, visual and non-visual, same but different, visual and non-visual, guess, describe, functions, etc. I can add, probably a whole bunch more, but that gives you a pretty good idea of some of the programs that have to be done before you get to this advanced level of programming. But when you're developing a programming at this level, again, I have to say that, and I can't say this enough, like all the skills have to be generalized. Mastery is only one component. Right? Mastery with some specific stimuli, even if you're teaching with generalized stimuli, doesn't mean that they're going to use that skill or concept when you are not around, when the therapy team is not around, when the teacher's not around, when they're not in school, when they're not in treatment. So generalization probes, again, have to be conducted. And I suggest that a lot of these probes at this level in a manner in which the child doesn't know that you're collecting probes, because that's how you're going to know. Because first of all, you exert some specific set of some control over the learner's behavior because you represent a certain set of contingencies, right? Your learning history with the child is very specific. She knows that you're monitoring, looking, teaching, observing. And when you're just playing and when you're just engaging, that seems very, very different. So do that, and you can still collect some probe data, either in a very sneaky way. A colleague, she would wear a piece of masking tape. And she would, she always had like a pencil or something, and she would just like poke holes in it or make little hash marks or something, and that would be, so nothing that the child could actually, would like notice or something like that. Anyway, I just thought that was clever. And same and different, Not only does mastery only occur after it's generalized, because mastery of very specific presentations of stimuli is only so important, but this is a teach one and probe for generalization sequence of program. Okay, sequence of programs. So the real life example, you say to a friend, hey, I'm thinking about buying a new car. Well, their brain should automatically start categorizing all the different new cars that they like, that they want, that they don't like, that have specific features and specific things. There's specific prices and the things that they really want, and the things that are out of their price range, and the things that blah, blah, blah. Like their brain automatically starts categorizing all of that stuff. And that's how they're able to hold up their side of the conversation, and being able to tell sameness and differences, like why do you want the blue car versus the red car? Why do you want this brand car versus that car? It's not only about categorization, it's about sameness and differences, etc. And there are a lot of prerequisites for that skill at an advanced level. So the following is a description of how to start your learner on the sequence of programs. And remember to teach one and probe for generalization. Okay, so we have to start with receptive, same, and different. So the first step is, so this opposites is here in a little orange box because it's not part of this programming sequence. It's a prerequisite skill. So you know how hard it is to teach opposites. That's why you shouldn't start receptive, same, and different until your kids mastered and generalized some opposites. Not all of them. It doesn't have to be like 20 or 30, but like, big, little, heavy, light, long, short, near, far, a couple like that. And, and I've said this before, that sometimes there are some kids that learn opposites better with ones that are more sensory, like heavy and light, wet and dry, hot and cold. So, but you have 4, 5, 6 opposites under your belt, and then you can start receptive, same, and different. But you have to continue teaching opposites, obviously, because there's a lot to learn with opposite pairs, and they go on to attributes where you're doing big, bigger, biggest, long, 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 longer, longest, et cetera. Got to master all your opposites first and generalize them. So in touch, same, and different, you're putting 2 identical pictures out and one that is different. And you're saying touch same or touch different. And so for the same response, the child uses 2 hands and touches the 2 pictures that are the same. And then for the different response, the child uses 1 hand to touch the picture that's different. So again, making something abstract salient to the child, because there's some sensory stuff going on there. And again, teach one, probe for generalization. Shouldn't really be that tough, because remember, if they did great at generalizing matching and non-identical matching, et cetera, and then their categories program, et cetera, they're probably working on at some level, then they should be able to get that first step. So really teaching them to touch with 2 hands versus 1 hand should be one of the most difficult things about teaching this program. Then once they get that down, they should just fall in line and look at the concept. Okay, so receptive, same, and different, which one? You say, which one is same or different? So you have 2 objects down and you're holding one up. And you say, which one's the same? And you say, which one's different? And first it starts with identical stimuli and then non-identical stimuli, right? So you want to make sure that, again, you're teaching one, probing for generalization, child does not meet criteria during the probe, then you can teach another one, probe for generalization again. And now these probes, you're probing for the skill. You're not probing for necessarily generalized responding in the natural environment. So you can sit there with a pencil and a clipboard and your data sheet and collect data on your probes. Okay, now this receptive, same, different goes to this version of expressive, same, and different, where you are showing the learner two objects or 2 picture cards, and you're saying, are they the same or different? And they respond accordingly. They're the same. They're different. You're not asking them why yet. Okay, so now we go into this, like a different version, just a somewhat more difficult version of expressive, same, and different. But before you can do this, the kid has to have mastered and generalized their plurals, because here's what you're doing. You're putting 3 objects on the table and you're asking what's the same or different. And they have to say object is different or objects are the same. And they're not going to be able to do that unless they've generalized being able to pluralize, okay? So again, teaching one, probing for generalization. Now, here's what's going on. So then we go into this program, same but different with objects, but you can't do that program until your learners mastered and generalized what doesn't belong, okay? Because here are the SDs. You're presenting two objects, and you say, how are they the same? Well, they're both either the category, function, or color, or some feature, and then you say, how are they different? And they say one is this and one is that, or they, there's some combination of that, or you can say, tell me how else are they different, or how else are they the same? You're not going to be just restricted to these SDs. Okay, so then we have same but different non-visual. So we take this program, it had the objects, and now we're doing the version that doesn't have objects. Still the same presentation. So now we get the same and different plus Y. So you're showing some pictures or some objects, or you're in the natural environment, and you point to a couple of things and you say, so look, so like I take these things. So here's a water bottle and a bottle of peanuts. And I say, well, why are these the same? Well, they're both plastic. They're both bottles. They both have lids. They both have labels. They both have stuff inside them, right? Well, how are they different? One has peanuts, one has water. One's dry, one's wet. One has a white cap, one has a blue cap. One has a green label, one has a blue label. See, like this is the kind of responding that you're looking for. So that's why you're going to teach with visuals first, and then you remove the visuals, right? So then you can just ask your child, so how are mommy's car and the mail truck the same? Well, I mean, they both have wheels, they're vehicles, and blah, like maybe they're both white, maybe they both have a stripe, etc. Well, how are they different? Well, the mailman drives one, mommy drives the other. One has, one has, like one's big and one's small. One has 4 doors, one has 2 doors. I mean, again, this is the kind of responding that you're looking for. So you expand your teaching to add, why else do you think it's same, different? And think of something like the object and tell me why it's the same or different. Now that is super, super hard, but when you work with kids that are at that level, you got to throw questions in or statements in there to evoke some specific kinds of answers that are going to cause them to think, because that's going to be the critical element, not rote memorization. Now, once that's done, then next you can incorporate that skill into academic work as well as conversational language practice for generalization. Okay, so your third keyword is peanuts. That's peanuts. So remember, if you are getting CEUs, you're going to send me your 3 keywords in an email to ray@abaskills.com. That's ray@abaskills.com, and I will make sure that you get your certificate of attendance and a copy of the PowerPoint.
Okay, so I do have a few pretty easy questions, I think.
Okay.
Okay, number 1 is, have you ever used a Venn diagram when you're talking about same and different?
Yes.
Yeah. I've found that to be pretty helpful especially when I'm using it with a learner who might engage with that type of graphic organizer in their academic work, because it sets them up for something in the future, like let's say they're doing something in history or they're comparing and contrasting something in science, then, using same and different that way kind of just lays the foundation for that a little bit. So I really like to use that sometimes. And also, I have worked with kids on similar and, kind of getting that in between.
Oh, right.
Space going, where we're talking, some things are the same because they're really really the same, and some things are just similar.
Right.
Not the same, they're different.
Right.
And that's, even a little bit more of like a fine grain filter for that. So one of the questions that I had is from the Facebook Live. Someone asked, well, why wouldn't you just ask, or would it be best to just ask, what is the person doing, rather than qualifying man, woman, boy, girl, baby?
Sure. I mean, you can say, what is mommy doing? What is daddy doing? But then you're really restricted with your stimuli. Then you're just restricted to people that the child can label.
I think that they didn't mean like the person, like a specific person. I think that they mean the general word person, holding up any person and just asking, what is the person doing?
Oh, what does the word person mean? So we have to look at all the words in the SD. Like, at what point does the child learn what the word person means? Because any word that you say to the child that they don't understand, I'm going to think, based on my experience, that they're just not going to pay attention to that word. And so I would rather have every word in the SD that I'm delivering mean something and exert some kind of control over the learner's response. So what is the boy doing? Then the learner should say the boy is. What is, plus, I mean, do people say person? I mean, I don't think I've ever said, I know I've never taught a child to say the person is actioning.
I've seen some things where people argue that you should use a general they, rather than qualifying a gender identity in the SD. But I do think that you're right. Every single piece of your SD should be meaningful. And
Right.
so I think even if somebody wants to have that cultural sensitivity, or even if they think, that's how they want to teach it, that, like your question before, you need to ask yourself, why am I making that choice?
Mm-hmm.
And also, what is that going to teach later?
Right.
Because there are some gender normative things that a child may really need to know, and so I think it's important for all of our professionals to be really careful in entirely avoiding, let's say, teaching anything gender related, because there are some things that our learners do need to know, and to kind of take that into consideration if they're just entirely avoiding it. I think that's good as something to discuss, maybe in another talk later, but I think that your answer is exactly precise, that we have to be mindful of every single word in the SD.
Right.
They each have part of the control,
Mm-hmm.
they share control of the stimuli that you're presenting. And so if you're only asking person, and we do need to know if that learner knows what person means versus something else. And you're right, I completely agree that if you are just breathing in words that you haven't taught, that they hold zero value. They don't mean anything. And so you may think that you're being culturally sensitive, or that maybe you're making a decision based on maybe avoiding gender normative terminology, but does your learner know that, and what do they know about that?
Right, because something that people don't think about for most of our kids, especially our younger kids with autism, it's like English is not their first language. Let's just say,
Exactly.
like they have no spoken language yet. So we have to teach them, this is what all of these words mean. When you say this, this is what, this is how the environment is going to respond to you. So like you gave the example of teaching a child similar, like it makes sense to me that teaching more advanced kids the different gradients and of what the appropriate pronouns are and how people identify with different pronouns would come with an advanced understanding of certain social norms, which of course, like, some kids that reach a certain level are going to have to know that. But a lot of our kids that aren't at that cognitive level, they just have to understand that boys, girls, men, women, and babies are just kind of like this collection. But what's interesting, now that I'm thinking about it, because I did describe how when you're collecting stimuli, It needs to be some like abstract level to something more like salient. So maybe that is some discussion to have with the child's parents and other professionals. Like, do we want to include, like either a different set or something else? But the point is that this is the child's first exposure to the English language, and so the words have to be meaningful.
Correct. And I think you and I have always been quite careful about the stimuli we're using that represent what a woman looks like, right? So we're very careful not to have, all, white women from magazines or something like that, but to have very different body shapes, very different skin colors, very different hairstyles, even including very short hair. And that's, our learners for sure experience a wide range of stimuli and what a woman means, what a man means, and that we're not using just like stereotypic exemplars when we're teaching it, for sure.
Exactly.
And I think you're right. As our learners advance through understanding these things, there's also some delicacy involved in knowing that their perspective taking skills are somewhat there as well, right? And that they can understand, yes, that person may not look the way that you may have learned, but that, they still identify as maybe the opposing gender that you've learned. And I think that's the same for most people, right? Across ages and skill domains. I know adults who haven't fully wrapped their minds around, the range of gender identities that are available today. So I think that it's an important conversation. I think it's a wonderful thing that we should, press that into our teaching and be mindful about how we're teaching it. And I really think your answer is exactly correct, that we have to be mindful of exactly every single word that we're putting in ESC. So very good. And maybe we can create an event where we discuss these things later, because I know you and I are very supportive of a range of gender identities and sexualities being taught to our learners. So maybe that's something that we can set up later.
Absolutely.
Another thing that two people asked about was programming books that you recommend. Someone asked if you could list them, and somebody else asked, do you have any books that you recommend? And earlier you showed that great slide with programming books, so maybe you can just review that one more time for us.
Sure. Here, it'd probably just be easier for me to do this, right? There it is. Right, so all of these books should be available on Amazon. This is a work in progress. The Me book, Teaching Language to Children with Autism and Other Developmental Disabilities, Teaching Individuals with Developmental Delays. I mean, I think it's important, especially for parents. I just had a call from a mom whose son is 21 months old, who was just diagnosed with autism. And so, I mean, I'm actually not going to be working with that family, but what I am doing is I'm helping like guide them through like the process of securing services, like understanding kind of like what things are going to look like or what they should look like, how things are supposed to go, and just going to be kind of like a sounding board. Like I think that sometimes parents are just told, hey, your kid has autism, there's the door, and then they have like no idea what to do. So this family is friends with a former colleague, so I'm gonna kind of like walk them through probably almost the entire first year of getting their program set up. But the first thing that I said to mom is, you should purchase this book, A Work in Progress, because it's a user-friendly manual that doesn't have a lot of technical jargon. It talks about sleeping challenges, toileting challenges, language challenges, and it like talks about how different things are going to be taught. And
Perfect.
And I think that that's really like a good place for all people to start. And then for something a little more technical, more for professionals, I just recommend the Sundberg and Partington manual.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, excellent. So I think that if anyone has any other questions about specific program questions or other types of materials that might be helpful, or a question about a specific program that they're running, you know, whether they be parents or professionals, they can email you at ray@abaskills.com. And also just a reminder about CEUs, that those 3 keywords that you said that we cannot repeat will be emailed to ray@abaskills.com. And as soon as this video is uploaded from the Zoom, it will be put on our YouTube channel. So I just want to plug that, because, you know, I get a lot of requests via email from people saying, oh, I couldn't make it, or I had something else scheduled that day or whatnot, that they really wanted to come to the presentation, and can they get a recording of it? The answer is always yes, 100%, absolutely, anytime. YouTube, ABA Skills.
Fantastic.
Our channel is going to have all of our content there, and you can still get the CEUs there as long as you watch the entire thing, write down the keywords, even from the YouTube channel, write down the keywords, and then email them to ray@abaskills.com. And as you know, as you register for that, you will get your certificate and you know, the materials from the event. So, you know, I think we're coming out with some amazing content. I've been getting a lot of good feedback about it, and this was an excellent presentation. These are some fine-grained programs for advanced language learners that I think a lot of people have a lot of difficulty teaching, and like you said, asking themselves, why am I doing this and where is it going? So these advanced language training presentations are really helpful as our field also gets more work done in the beginning, right? So we are doing such a good job in our field of getting kids up to mainstream type education by doing excellent early intervention, but they do still need a lot of work. Professionals, I mean, need a lot of work in their advanced language training programming. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And have a great night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.